In the UFC, one mistake can end your entire career. A late punch, a dirty submission, a moment of rage, or something much darker. These aren't just losses. These are bans for life. Today, we're diving into the most shocking UFC bans ever. Start with Paul Daley. He was a renowned British fighter in the welterweight division and a fan favorite for his powerful and tactical prowess. However, at UFC 113, Daley let his emotions override his brain and fatefully let them end his UFC career. On May 8, 2010, Daley fought Josh Koscheck. The winner of this fight was going to become the next challenger against Georges St-Pierre for the UFC welterweight championship. Not only that, the winner would also get the opportunity to coach against St-Pierre on the 12th season of The Ultimate Fighter. In the past, Daley had shown immense promise, and many fans believed he had what it took to become the challenger. But things didn't go as they were planned. In the first round, Koscheck appeared to simulate being hit with an illegal knee, which resulted in a point deduction for Daley. This caused tempers to flare. During the fight, Koscheck went on to dominate Daley with his wrestling for most of the match and eventually was declared the winner by unanimous decision. But Daley didn't seem like he wanted to accept this defeat. Against the fence, he threw a punch at Koscheck after the final bell. The altercation, although short, quickly became one of the biggest scandals in UFC at the time. And by the end of the night, UFC President Dana White came forward with a shocking revelation. He announced that he was banning Daley from the UFC for life. White said, "There's no excuse for that. These guys are professional athletes. You don't ever hit a guy blatantly after the bell like that, whether you're frustrated or not." He added, "I don't care if he fights in every show all over the world and becomes the best, and everybody thinks he's the pound-for-pound best in the world. He will never fight in the UFC ever again." White followed by saying he spoke to Daley after the fight, and Daley had claimed he had not heard the bell. Daley later apologized for his actions after returning to the United Kingdom, saying that Koscheck's trash-talking pushed him over the edge, but that there was no excuse for his rash decision. While Daley did go on to fight in other tournaments, his UFC career truly came to an end that night. This, however, is nothing in comparison to what Rousimar Palhares did to get banned. Rousimar Palhares is a Brazilian mixed martial artist that was banned from the UFC for his almost sinister lack of sportsmanship. Palhares is mainly known for his insanely powerful ground game. 12 out of his 16 submission victories have come from leg locks. But that's where things get tricky. He's also known for his complete and absolute refusal to release submission holds, even when the opposing fighter has signaled submission or when the referee has called stop. Not releasing holds is already a serious offense, as it causes irreversible and unneeded physical damage to your opponent who's already yielded the fight. But Palhares liked to take it a step further. He would intentionally crank the hook further upon taps. Historically, Palhares wasn't known for following the rules. In the UFC middleweight division, after a loss, the UFC announced that Palhares had tested positive for elevated testosterone levels in his post-fight drug test and subsequently had been suspended for 9 months. When Palhares eventually dropped down to the welterweight division, he had his fateful fight against Mike Pierce on October 9th, 2013. Here, Palhares went in for his usual heel hook, and just 31 seconds into round 1, he finished with a submission. It was the only submission of the night, but instead of walking away with a bonus check, he walked right into a major controversy. Palhares had simply refused to release the hold for too long. Pierce, showing visible agony and pain, had tapped out 8 times, but rather than letting go, Palhares cranked the hook further. The referee at the time, Keith Peterson, went in head first to ease the pressure on Mike's leg while urging Palhares to let go. While he eventually did, the UFC later called it unsportsmanlike conduct. To put in perspective, the average time it takes for a fighter to let go is around 0.14 seconds. The fact that it took him longer seemed like a demented attempt to seriously injure his opponent. The next day, while conducting an interview, UFC President Dana White told ESPN's Jeremy Schaap that he was going to cut Palhares from their roster immediately and that he's done. Later, Zuffa released a statement via UFC reminding fans that this wasn't Palhares' first warning. He'd already been suspended for 90 days for a similar incident in 2010, where he didn't release a heel hook, coupled with his drug test failure. Although Palhares is still a successful fighter, the UFC truly did not look back at him, just like they didn't with Jason High. Jason High's UFC career didn't end in the octagon due to a loss. It ended with a split-second decision fueled by frustration, a decision he paid a very hefty fee for. In 2014, Jason stepped into the cage to face Rafael dos Anjos. The fight in question didn't go his way, and Dos Anjos was relentless. After a flurry of strikes, the referee stepped in and waved it off, calling it a TKO loss. Jason, however, didn't see it that way. He'd already lost many fights before this, and this one was the last shot he had to prove himself. He thought the stoppage was premature, and in the heat of the moment, he snapped. In a career-ending move, he turned to the referee, Kevin Mulhall, and shoved him. Right there, his whole career took a nosedive. Touching a referee is one of the biggest taboos in combat sports, and it clearly disgusted Dana White. I'm going to cut him. I'll look at the way Paul Daley put his hands on his opponent after a fight was over. You don't ever fucking touch a referee, ever. You're done here. He's been apologizing on Twitter, but he's done. Dana White comparing it to Daley shows how critical Jason's actions were. Daley was banned for life, and now Jason was added to that very short list. Within hours, Jason's name was scrubbed from the UFC roster. He issued a public apology on Twitter, hoping to smooth things over, but it didn't matter. The UFC had made its decision, and it wasn't changing. All this showed was that the organization holds its referees in the highest regard. They're there to protect fighters, make the tough calls, and keep order. The moment that order is broken, even for a second, the UFC wanted to prove that it acts fast. For Jason, it was a career-ending misstep, one moment of emotion, and just like that, the UFC door slammed shut. But for others, like War Machine, the actions weren't split-second decisions, but extended levels of demented behavior. War Machine, born Jonathan Koppenhaver, was once an up-and-coming name in the fighting world. But what happened outside the cage is what would ultimately define him. In 2014, War Machine's life and career took a violent and irreversible turn, all by his own hands. He was the cause of a brutally violent attack on his ex-girlfriend Christy Mack and her friend who was present in the house at the time. According to reports, he had broken into her house and, in a fit of rage, got into a physical altercation with her and her friend Corey Thomas. After beating Corey to the point where he started convulsing, he told him to leave the house. Now that he had Christy alone, he grotesquely started beating her until he caused her to have a broken eye socket, multiple broken ribs, and lost teeth. He also attempted to sexually assault her and cut all her hair off. After all of this, he went to look for a knife, at one point claiming that he had to offer. Christy took this window of opportunity to get outside and bang on any neighbor's door until they listened and called the cops. What's truly disturbing, however, is how Jonathan portrayed it in his tweets after the incident. He alleged that he loved her and ended up fighting for his life, contrary to what actually happened. In response, Christy posted the graphic images of the aftermath of their altercation on her Twitter to show proof of what she went through. War Machine was arrested and later convicted on 29 charges, including sexual assault and kidnapping. The story made national headlines, and not just in the fight world. After a crime like this, all chances of having any career dissolved. National headlines were one thing. It also took the MMA world by storm. Everyone was questioning the sport and the type of people it brought into the spotlight. Fingers were being pointed, and something had to be done. It really frustrated the UFC. Every headline labeled him as an ex-UFC fighter. And Dana White? He wasn't having it. It's horrible, man. Horrible. White said in response to the media frenzy. And every time I got to see ex-UFC fighter when the stories are written, he fought twice in the UFC 6 years ago. He's a current Bellator Viacom fighter. White went on to say that his staff contacted news outlets to correct the narrative, only to hear, "We don't know what Bellator is." His response was simple. Ever heard of Viacom? That's who he fights for. He fights for Viacom, not the UFC. The UFC had long cut ties with War Machine. The organization's stance on violent criminal behavior outside the octagon is crystal clear: zero tolerance, no comebacks, and definitely no reconsideration. War Machine was sentenced to life in prison, with an increasingly slim chance of parole, erasing any hope of a return to UFC or a normal life outside of bars. Now, he's just another reminder, one of many we'll see further in this video, that talent in the cage means nothing if you can't control what happens outside of it. Matt Riddle. This lesson seems to be a hard one for fighters to realize. Once a rising force in the UFC's welterweight division, Riddle had all the tools to go far in the championship. Explosive energy, elite takedown defense, and a relentless pace that kept opponents guessing. But it wasn't any physical altercation that ended his UFC career. Instead, it was what showed up on a drug test. On February 26, 2013, Riddle revealed he had failed another test for marijuana, and that was his second violation in less than a year, becoming the obvious breaking point. The UFC released Riddle from the promotion. And here's the twist. Performance-wise, Riddle was thriving. He walked away ranked third in UFC history for takedown defense, an insane 89.3%. He was also 8th all-time in total strikes landed, with a whopping 1,350 shots connected. And without the marijuana-related no contests, his official UFC record would have stood at 10-3, riding a 5-fight win streak. He was on his way to climbing the UFC ranks. But 2 failed drug tests cut that momentum short. Instead of chasing title contention, Riddle was shown the door. Since then, he made a successful jump to professional wrestling. But fans can't help but wonder, what would his UFC career be like if the organization had more lenient laws around marijuana? As a response to this ordeal, White was adamant he'd never grace the octagon again, saying, "Everybody's going to have an excuse for why they were cut." Matt Riddle did an interview before that fight, where he said, "I smoke weed so that I don't beat my children." Then he tests positive for it. He's a fucking moron. That's why he's not here. He's cut because he's a moron. I'll make it real easy for him. We just won't ask him to come back. Thiago Silva. Some might say drugs are a fighter's biggest weakness. And Thiago Silva sure places some merit to those accusations. Silva's story was once all about potential. By 2009, he was a legitimate threat in the UFC's stacked light heavyweight division, and people were already whispering his name in title contention talks. But his rise inside the cage was slowly overshadowed by chaos outside of it. And by the end, Thiago Silva's UFC career had completely imploded. Let's start with the first major red flag. UFC 125, January 1st, 2011. Silva stepped in against Brandon Vera and delivered a dominant performance. It looked like a bounce-back moment, something to put his name back into the mix at 205. But the win didn't last long. Soon after the fight, the Nevada State Athletic Commission announced that Silva's urine sample raised serious concerns. In fact, after testing in 2 separate labs, they confirmed it was inconsistent with human urine, suggesting Silva had either altered or outright substituted his sample to cheat the drug test. The community erupted and news spread like wildfire. One day later, Silva confessed in a public statement. He admitted to using a urine adulterant in an attempt to alter the results of the drug test, fully acknowledging he had broken the rules. He said, "This was a terrible decision on my part. I am prepared to accept this punishment, learn from it, and move on." And it's safe to say that the punishment was harsh. The win over Vera was overturned to a no contest. He was suspended for 1 full year and fined a whopping $20,000 out of his $55,000 win bonus. All of this, and the added cloud of cheating, followed him from that point forward. However, he got some grace and returned to the octagon in 2012 and picked up a win over Stanislav Nedkov, but never fully regained momentum. Then, 2014 happened. On February 6th, 2014, Silva was arrested in Oakland Park, Florida, in what would become the most damaging incident of his career. Police reports said Silva had entered the Popovich Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Center armed and aggressive. The targets were Pablo Popovich, a respected BJJ coach, and Silva's estranged wife, Thesa Kamiji, who was allegedly in a relationship with Popovich at the time. It was a deeply personal conflict that escalated into a legal disaster. The day before, Kamiji had already filed a report claiming Silva violated a restraining order. Then came the confrontation at the gym, and Silva was arrested and charged with aggravated battery with a deadly weapon, aggravated assault, and resisting arrest without violence. The UFC acted immediately. Dana White didn't hold back. In an interview that same day, he stated, "He will never fight in the UFC again." Minner and Molina. These 2 fighters are not like the others on this list. This wasn't a knockout, wasn't a submission, but it might as well go down as one of the most damaging L's we've seen in UFC history. And it didn't even happen inside the cage. 2 former UFC fighters, Jeff Molina and Derek Minner, were officially suspended by the Nevada State Athletic Commission. But unlike past fighters, it was because of something that cuts deeper in the world of professional sports: gambling. Derek Minner, 34 years old, walked into his UFC bout on November 5th, 2022 with a serious knee injury. He didn't tell the commission. He didn't tell the medical staff. He stepped into the octagon compromised, and within the first round, he was finished by Shailon Nurdambek. The way it unfolded wasn't just a routine TKO. It immediately raised suspicions. The fight ended in just over a minute, and it looked like Minner didn't belong there at all. But what really triggered the alarm bells was the betting activity before the fight. Unusual wagers came flooding in, all on Nurdambek to win early. That kind of action doesn't happen by accident, and it usually never goes unnoticed. U.S. Integrity, the organization that monitors sports betting irregularities, flagged it immediately. The fight became the focal point of an investigation that would reveal something much bigger than a single injured fighter trying to push through a bad night. Minner was eventually hit with a 29-month suspension for failing to disclose his injury. He's not eligible to return until March 26, 2025. But then the focus shifted to another name, Jeff Molina. At just 27 years old, Molina was considered one of the UFC's brightest flyweight prospects. Fast, sharp, and promising. But behind the scenes, he wasn't just watching that Minner fight, he was betting on it. And worse, he had core inside information. The allegations were that he knew Minner was hurt, and that's why he placed a substantial bet on that specific fight without disclosing anything to the commission. According to reports, Molina admitted to the violation. The result? A full 3-year suspension from sport. He won't be eligible to return until November 2025. But what ties these two fighters together, beyond the bad decisions, is one man, James Krauss. A former UFC fighter turned coach, Krauss was known for his technical mind and analytical approach to fighting. But he was also vocal about betting on MMA. In fact, Krauss had previously said publicly that he made more money from betting than coaching. That raised eyebrows, and now he's right in the middle of a wide-reaching investigation into an alleged illegal gambling operation. Both Molina and Minner trained under Krauss. And after the scandal erupted, the UFC moved fast. Fighters were immediately banned from training at Krauss's gym. He was barred from cornering fighters. His license was suspended. The message from the UFC was clear. Until this is resolved, there's no room for Krauss anywhere near the organization. As of now, Krauss hasn't said a word publicly, and the investigation still continues in court. Minner's punishment ends in early 2025, and Molina's follows later that year. But the stain on their reputations and the broader consequences of this scandal may last much longer. The UFC, like all major sports organizations, is walking a fine line between embracing the world of legalized betting and protecting the integrity of the sport. In the UFC, the cage can make you a legend, or end everything you've worked for in a single second. If this story shocked you, there's a lot more coming. So hit that subscribe button and don't miss what's next.